What would you do if the man who swore to protect you, the father of your unborn children, chose to shatter your world on the one night of the year that's supposed to be about family and togetherness? This isn't a hypothetical question. It happened to me. In the coming moments, I will tell you how my husband, a man who commanded boardrooms and built a billion-dollar empire, left me, 8 months pregnant with his twins, to spend Christmas Eve proposing to his mistress. He thought I was just a wife, a decoration, a soft place to land. He was wrong. He would soon learn that while he was building his empire, I was the one who had memorized the blueprints, and I was about to set it all on fire. Stay with me, and I'll show you how in the 24 hours after I silently signed our divorce papers, I took everything. Let me take you back to the beginning of the end. It started with the scent of jasmine, faint, cloying, and utterly foreign. It clung to the collar of his suit jacket, the one he'd worn to a supposed late-night board meeting. I was nesting, a primal urge that had consumed me in the final trimester of my high-risk pregnancy. Our cavernous penthouse, usually a testament to minimalist chic curated by decorators, was now softened by my frantic preparations. I folded tiny onesies, my swollen belly pressing against the cool marble of the laundry room counter. Our life was a portrait of success. Julian was the charismatic titan of tech, the visionary whose face graced magazine covers. I was Alara, his quiet, supportive wife. The world saw me as the beautiful, serene partner who managed our homes and our social calendar with effortless grace. They didn't know I had a degree in forensic accounting. They didn't know I'd stepped away from a promising career to support his meteoric rise, a decision we had made together, a decision I was beginning to see in a terrifying new light. That night, he came home after midnight, smelling of expensive whiskey and that alien perfume. He kissed my forehead, his lips cool. "Long night, darling," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that used to soothe me. "The deal is on thin ice." I nodded, playing my part, the dutiful wife, the concerned partner. But a sliver of ice was already forming in my gut, sharp and cold, right beside the warmth of my slumbering babies. The real discovery, the one that cracked the foundation of my world, came 2 days later. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The city was a blur of gray slush and hurried footsteps below our window. Julian had left his tablet on the nightstand, a rare oversight for a man surgically attached to his devices. An email notification pinged. It was from a high-end jeweler, a place we'd never shopped, a digital receipt. My heart hammered against my ribs. I told myself it was a surprise for me, a Christmas gift, maybe an early push present for the twins. My fingers trembled as I opened it. It was not a gift for me. The receipt was for a diamond necklace, a delicate star-shaped pendant I had never seen before. Engraved. The inscription read, "To my forever. C. C. My name is Alara." The charge was dated 3 weeks prior, on the day of our 5th wedding anniversary. The day he'd told me he was stuck in a critical all-day negotiation in another state. The day he sent me a massive bouquet of lilies with a simple card that said, "Happy anniversary. I'll make it up to you." The jewelry store was located 2 blocks from a boutique hotel in a part of town he had no business being in. He had made it up to someone. It just wasn't me. That was the first crack. The moment the carefully constructed reality of my life began to splinter. I closed the tablet, my movements slow, deliberate. I placed it back on the nightstand, exactly as he'd left it. My breathing was shallow. The babies inside me shifted, a sudden frantic fluttering. It was as if they could feel my panic. My first instinct was to scream, to throw the tablet against the wall, to confront him the second he walked through the door. But another voice, colder and quieter, whispered in the back of my mind. "Not yet. Information is power. Do not give him yours." That night, I became a ghost in my own home. I waited until the sound of his deep, even breathing filled the master suite. Then I slipped out of bed. The city lights cast long shadows across the floor as I padded into his home office. This room was his sanctuary, a fortress of leather, mahogany, and steel. He was arrogant. He was careless. He assumed I had no interest in the mechanics of his empire, So he used the same password for everything. Our anniversary. The irony was a bitter pill on my tongue. I started with his laptop. Years of supporting him, of listening to him talk through deals and strategies, had given me a roadmap to his digital life. I knew which folders held the sensitive data, which chat applications he used for discreet communication. It didn't take long. There was a dedicated message thread with someone saved as C. Chloe. Her name was Chloe, a junior vice president from a rival company he was supposedly trying to acquire. The messages were a timeline of my own personal hell, hundreds of them, thousands. They stretched back nearly 2 years. 2 years of my life had been a lie. There were pictures of them. Laughing in a Parisian cafe on a weekend, he was supposedly at a tech conference in Berlin, kissing on a yacht in the Caribbean during a solo fishing trip to clear his head. Her, wearing the star-shaped necklace. My grief was a physical thing. It was a stone in my chest, a pressure behind my eyes that threatened to shatter me. I wanted to curl up on the floor and cease to exist, but the babies kicked, a sharp, insistent reminder. I was not just fighting for myself anymore. Grief began to curdle. It soured into something else, something cold, something hard, rage. My tears dried before they could fall. My trembling hands grew steady. I was no longer a wife discovering a betrayal. I was a forensic accountant staring at a mountain of evidence. I worked through the night with a chilling efficiency. I used a portable drive to copy everything, emails, text logs, photos. But I didn't stop there. I dug deeper. I went into his financial files, the ones he thought were protected by layers of jargon I wouldn't understand. And there it was, the real betrayal. It wasn't just the affair. It was the money. He had set up a series of shell corporations, offshore accounts. He was systematically siphoning money from our shared marital assets, hiding millions. He was building a new life with her, funded by the life we had built together. One of the holding companies caught my eye. E.G. Holdings. My initials, Alara Grace. My blood ran cold. I remembered him mentioning it years ago, laughing it off as a simple tax shelter. He'd had me sign some papers, telling me it was a formality for his business. He had put a significant portfolio of assets, including a block of pre-IPO shares in a tech startup, solely in my name. He did it to shield them from his company's liabilities, assuming his naive wife would never know or care. He'd used my name, my identity. He'd made me an unwitting accomplice in his fraud, all while sleeping with another woman. He had handed me the gun, and he had just shown me where the bullets were kept. By the time the sun began to paint the sky in shades of gray and pink, I had a complete schematic of his deception. I crept back into our bed. He stirred, reaching for me in his sleep, his arm draping over my pregnant belly. I didn't flinch. I lay there, a statue of ice, and I began to plan his ruin. The final piece of confirmation, the one that annihilated the last vestiges of my sentimentality, came a week later. I needed irrefutable proof, something that would stand up in court, and, more importantly, something that would destroy him publicly. So I did something I never thought I would. I hired a private investigator, a discreet, expensive firm recommended by an old college friend. They were brutally efficient. The report landed in my encrypted email inbox 5 days later. It was a single folder containing photographs and a short video. The images were of Julian and Chloe, leaving a renowned fertility clinic. She was holding his hand. He was smiling, a genuine, unguarded smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. The final photograph was a close-up taken through the window of their car. Chloe was holding a sonogram picture. She was pregnant. He wasn't just having an affair. He was starting a new family. He was replacing us. That was the moment of despair. I sank to the floor of my walk-in closet, surrounded by clothes he had bought me, surrounded by the scent of a life that was no longer real. The weight of it all finally broke me. A single, guttural sob escaped my lips. It was a sound of pure agony, the sound of a heart breaking, the sound of a future dying. I let myself feel it all for exactly 10 minutes, the crushing weight of his betrayal, the humiliation, the terror of facing this alone. Then I stood up. I wiped my eyes. The despair receded, leaving behind a terrifying crystalline clarity. He had made his choice. Now I would make mine. I picked up my phone. There was only one person I could call. My sister, Catherine. We hadn't been close in years. She was a shark, the most feared corporate litigation attorney in the city. She saw my marriage to Julian as a surrender, a waste of my potential. She'd been right. Her phone picked up on the second ring. Alara. Her voice was sharp, surprised. "I need your help, Kat," I said, my own voice steady, devoid of the emotion that had just ripped me apart. There was a pause. "Tell me," she said, her tone shifting from familial to professional. And so I did. I told her everything. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I'm booking a conference room," she finally said. "My office, tomorrow, 7 in the morning. Bring the drive." That was the pivot, the moment I went from victim to client, the moment I declared war. The next morning, Catherine's office felt like a command center. The view from the 40th floor was a panorama of power, the city spread out like a conquered map. Catherine wasn't alone. She had assembled a team, a forensic accountant named Marcus, who looked more like a librarian than a financial bloodhound, and a silver-haired divorce lawyer named Anya, whose gentle demeanor masked a reputation for utter ruthlessness. The war room was cold, professional, and exactly what I needed. There was no pity in their eyes, only strategy. For 3 hours, I laid it all out. I presented the data from the drive with the cold detachment of an analyst, the affair, the hidden accounts, the shell corporations, and the ace up my sleeve, EG Holdings. When I explained how Julian had put a fortune in assets solely in my name, Marcus, the accountant, actually let out a low whistle. "He's an arrogant fool," Marcus said, peering at the documents on the screen. "He leveraged your name to protect his assets from corporate creditors, never dreaming you'd be the one to come after them." Anya, the divorce lawyer, smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Legally, Alara, everything in EG Holdings is yours, untouchable in a divorce settlement. It's not marital property, it's your property." The plan we formulated that morning was a masterpiece of legal and financial warfare. It was divided into 4 phases. Phase 1, asset control. Catherine's team would prepare the paperwork to give me immediate and total control over EG Holdings. This included the power to liquidate everything. Phase 2, evidence documentation. The PI would be retained to provide continuous legally admissible surveillance of Julian and Chloe. We needed to document cohabitation and financial support to use as leverage. Phase 3, financial warfare. Marcus would trace every dollar Julian had moved offshore. He would prepare a report to be delivered to the SEC and the IRS. The fraudulent conveyance of marital assets was a crime. We were going to make sure he was charged. Phase 4, the strike. We would wait for the perfect moment, a moment he was distracted, vulnerable, and overconfident. "He mentioned he's closing a massive merger," I told them. "He's flying out for a final meeting on Christmas Eve." Anya's sharp eyes met mine across the table. "He's not going to a meeting, is he, Alara?" "No," I said, my voice flat. "He's taking her to Aspen. I found the reservations." Catherine leaned forward, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "Christmas Eve," she said. "How beautifully poetic." The next 2 weeks were a blur of secret meetings and coded phone calls. On the surface, I was the perfect, glowing, expectant mother. I went to my prenatal appointments. I decorated the nursery for our twin boys. I smiled and nodded when Julian talked about his stressful business deal. I played my part so perfectly that he never suspected a thing. His arrogance was my greatest weapon. He saw me as fragile, emotional, consumed by my pregnancy. He saw what he wanted to see. He never saw the woman who spent her nights on encrypted calls with a team of lawyers, meticulously planning the demolition of his entire life. Christmas Eve arrived on a wave of frigid air and fake cheer. Julian kissed me goodbye at the door, his hand resting on my belly. "I hate to leave you right now, darling," he said, his voice a perfect symphony of regret. "This merger is the final piece of the puzzle. It's for us, for our family." I looked into his eyes, the eyes I had once loved, and felt nothing. Just a cold, hollow emptiness. "Be safe," I whispered, touching his cheek. "Call me when you land." The moment the door clicked shut, I went into motion. The strike had begun. My phone rang. It was Catherine. "He's on the jet," she said. "Wheels up in 5. "Let's begin," I replied. The next few hours were a whirlwind of parallel action. I was in our apartment, which no longer felt like my home, but like a staging ground. My team was executing the plan with military precision. While Julian was sipping champagne at 30,000 feet, flying toward his new life, I was systematically dismantling his old one. The first call was to the broker Catherine had on standby. "Liquidate everything in EG Holdings," I said, my voice calm. "All of it." "Now?" There was a pause. "Confirming the order to sell all shares," the broker said. "The pre-IPO block as well. It's a significant sum." "I'm aware," I said. "Execute." Millions of dollars began to flow into a new account at a different bank, an account Julian had no knowledge of and no access to, an account in my name alone. At the same time, the PI's update came in, a photo of Julian's private jet touching down in Aspen. Chloe was waiting on the tarmac wrapped in a white fur coat. They kissed. A long, passionate kiss. My heart didn't even twinge. It was just data now, evidence. The second call was to the real estate agent. The penthouse, our beautiful home, was technically owned by a trust that was part of the EG Holdings portfolio. It was my property. "I'm accepting the cash offer," I told her. "We close tomorrow morning. The power of attorney is with my lawyer." While Julian and Chloe were checking into a luxurious mountain chalet, I was selling our home out from under him. The third call was to a moving company, a discreet overnight crew. I directed them to pack only my personal belongings, the items in the nursery, and certain pieces of art I had inherited from my grandmother. Everything else was to be left behind, an empty shell. As Julian was likely ordering room service and opening a bottle of vintage wine, my team was emptying my life from our shared space. The final piece was the most brutal. Anya, my divorce lawyer, walked into the family court and filed an emergency petition. She presented the evidence of financial fraud, of his plans to flee the country with marital assets, and proof of his affair. A judge, woken on Christmas Eve, signed an ex parte order. It froze every known asset Julian had, every bank account, every credit card, every stock portfolio, everything he hadn't hidden in my name was now ice. The PI sent one last update just after 10 o'clock. It was a grainy photo taken through the window of a restaurant. Julian was on one knee. He was holding a ring box. Chloe had her hands over her mouth, tears of joy streaming down her face. He was proposing to his pregnant mistress on Christmas Eve, while his pregnant wife was taking his entire empire apart, piece by piece. I looked at the photo, at the man I thought I knew, and I felt a strange sense of peace. He had made his bed. I just made sure he would have nothing to lie in. I spent the night in a suite at the Four Seasons, paid for with my new, very liquid bank account. The next morning, Christmas Day, I signed the final closing papers for the penthouse. I signed the divorce papers Anya had couriered over. I signed them without a single word. My signature, a clean, sharp line. The end of a chapter. The beginning of a new one. And then I waited. He returned 2 days later. He would have tried to call, of course, but I had a new phone, a new number. The old one was at the bottom of the hotel trash can. He would have found his credit cards declined. He would have called his bank, his broker, his assistants, only to be met with confusion and legal stonewalling. Panic would have been setting in. He arrived at the penthouse in the early evening, expecting to come home and deal with a minor financial glitch. He was met by a locksmith changing the locks. A new family, a couple with a young child, was directing movers in the lobby. The doorman, who had known Julian for years, simply handed him a single envelope and refused to meet his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling," the doorman said. "I have instructions not to let you upstairs." I watched it all from a car parked across the street. I saw the confusion on his face turn to disbelief, then to rage. He tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It contained a copy of the divorce filing, the court order freezing his assets, and an address. My new address. He arrived 20 minutes later, his face a thunderous mask. He stormed past the concierge of my new building, a sleek, modern high-rise I had purchased that morning. He didn't have to ask for the apartment number. I owned the entire top floor. The elevator doors opened directly into my living room. And he saw me. I was sitting on a plush white sofa, a cup of chamomile tea in my hands. The room was still sparse, but the nursery furniture was set up in a glass-walled room overlooking the city. I was calm, serene. I was no longer the woman he had left behind. "Alara, what the hell is this?" he roared, his voice echoing in the vast empty space. "What have you done?" I took a slow sip of my tea. I placed the cup down on the marble table beside me. "I believe the legal term," I said, my voice even and cold, "is divorce." "You can't do this," he sputtered, waving the papers in his hand. "The house, my accounts. This is insane." "The house was in my name, Julian," I said simply. "A tax shelter, remember? You were so clever." His face went pale. The realization began to dawn in his eyes. E.G. Holdings. "The shares, the portfolio," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Also in my name," I confirmed. "I liquidated them. Thank you for that, by the way. The pre-IPO shares did exceptionally well. It's more than enough to raise our sons in comfort for the rest of their lives." He stared at me, his arrogant facade crumbling to reveal the panicked, weak man beneath. "This is my money, my life. You're a thief." "No," I said, standing up slowly, my pregnant form a silhouette against the glittering city lights. "I was your partner. I was the woman you swore to love and honor, the mother of your children. You were the one who tried to steal our future to build a new one with her." His phone buzzed then, and again, and again. He glanced down at it, his face contorting in confusion. "That would be the news alerts," I said helpfully. "My sister's firm sent an anonymous tip to the Securities and Exchange Commission this afternoon, along with a very detailed report from a forensic accountant about your offshore accounts and fraudulent conveyance of marital assets." He looked up from his phone, his eyes wide with sheer terror. "You didn't. Your company's board has been notified," I continued, my voice relentless. "They don't take kindly to their chief executive officer being investigated for federal crimes. I imagine you'll be asked to resign by morning, if you aren't already under arrest." He sank onto a nearby ottoman, the fight draining out of him completely. He was broken, ruined. He had lost his company, his fortune, and his freedom in the span of 24 hours. All because he underestimated the woman he called his wife. He looked up at me one last time, a pathetic, pleading look on his face. "Alara, why?" I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the city. My city now. "You built an empire, Julian," I said softly, my hand resting protectively on my belly where my sons were sleeping. "You just forgot who laid the foundation."